Hello, I'm Liselle Sambury. I'm a young adult author, and welcome to my top reads of 2020 from a writer's perspective. I thought it would be cool to talk about some of my favorite books that I've read of the year, but specifically about how they helped me with writing craft and things that I've learned about writing craft. Because I think the thing about being a writer is that of course, you are often, almost always, going to be a reader, but then you start reading books not just for pleasure, but also to learn different things from different authors. For me personally, I try and read a lot in my genre that I write in and the genres that I write in so that it can help me get a feel not only for what other authors are doing in their books, but also things like market, and knowing what sort of books that are coming out in your genre are doing and what they're like and the sort of things that are selling. But this is really about craft specifically and like things that I think these books did really well that you can really learn from as a writer to improve your own craft. And so that's what this video is about today. So I'm just gonna jump straight into it. The first book I want to talk about is Legendborn. It's wild to me that I have like a bunch of physical books for this. For the longest time, really up until this year, truly, I mostly bought ebooks. And so ebooks are like audiobooks or that sort of thing. And so it was pretty rare for me to have a physical book when I was making a video talking about books. But now I have physical books. So here it is, Legendborn by Tracy Deonn. This is one of my favorite. Obviously, all of these are my top reads of the year, but like it landed real high up. Real high up on the list. I really loved it. I think it's an amazing story. I definitely think you should check it out. And it's about a girl named Bree who has recently lost her mother, and she finds herself in this secret society of like Arthurian legends, and it's super cool, and I adore it. Anyway, I'm here to talk about writing craft. I am going to talk about it. I'm not just going to gush about the book endlessly. So something I think this book did so well was really showing you how to write a page turner. Because this book, like, she thick. It's not a small book. This is a hefty book, and I blew through this book like nothing because every time I finished a chapter, I like just immediately had to read the next chapter. There was just always something propelling me to keep going and keep going and keep going and keep going. And so I read it so fast, even though it's like a really huge book. And so I think it's a really good lesson for writers in like how to keep your reader engaged and how to keep them turning the pages endlessly and wanting to find out what's happening next. I think it also did really well in terms of a balance of a book that's like fantasy and all the fun of fantasy, but also really incorporating the struggles of that individual character, in this case, who is a Black girl, and, you know, the microaggressions that come with that, and also talking about the history of the character. And I think all of that was weaved in really well. And I think something especially done well was the weaving of Black history within a magic system. And just like, I think if you are a person that's writing something and you're trying to weave in history, like real life events with magic and like fantasy, I think this did such a good job of that. And it was so natural and it just worked. It didn't feel like something that was just kind of stuck in. And really, it was only until I read the author's note that I understood just how much history had gone into it, because some things I just like assumed were fabricated because they fit so perfectly, but it was just a really good weaving of those two together. And finally, a love triangle done right. A love triangle done right. I am actually kind of a hoe for love triangles, so I won't pretend like I don't like love triangles, but I think there's so many that just kind of fall short. And I think the one in this book is done so well because I think, for one, because it's not the primary focus of the character. And so when it comes in, it's like it's an extra spice. It isn't like the sort of thing that came in I don't know, some love triangles just feel so artificially inserted. And like that makes them boring. But I think Legendborn has done such a great job. And I think it's because it's like such a low-key love triangle. Like you're reading and you're like la da 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 da. And then suddenly it shows up and you're like, I'm interested in this though. I want to see where this goes, but this didn't encapsulate the whole character such that you started to feel like being in a love triangle was the main character's personality trait. And so those are, I think, really great lessons from Legendborn. And The Year of the Witching, I will put over here by Alexis Henderson. I didn't get the physical copy and then I regretted it so much. And it's really hard for me to buy a physical copy of a book once I've like already read an ebook or something, because I'm just like, why do you need that? But anyway, enough talking about my physical book conundrums. I think this is an adult book. So let me tell you what the story is about. It's an adult book. It is about a girl living in a sort of Puritan type fantasy world, and her mom was basically like called a witch and like condemned, and so people don't really like her because of that. It's a whole thing, and she gets like involved with all these like witches of the forest. It's like very cool. Her name is Emmanuel is her name. I was like, her name is escaping me. Yeah. So The Year of the Witching, writing wise, to me is a whole lesson in atmosphere. Like this is where there's a prologue, and usually I hate prologues, and I was like, I hate prologues. But when I read that prologue, I was like, I think I just hate fantasy and sci-fi prologues. But this is like a very dark fantasy horror. Like I think it's a really good blend of both dark fantasy elements and horror elements, and the prologue was just so good. It perfectly set up the atmosphere for the book. It perfectly like foreshadowed events to come, and it just did such a good job, and it was necessary. It wasn't the sort of prologue where I was like, why, like you could have just shown me this through like backstory. It really needed that scene. That scene was pivotal. And so I think the entirety of this book does such a good job in terms of not only foreshadowing but atmosphere. Just like it feels dark, and you can feel the gothicness of it. You can feel like how foreboding everything is to come. It just does such a great job with that. And like even there's this like premonition of like blood and blight, and I can't remember the other one, slaughter, and there's another one I can't remember, my memory is bad, but those premonitions and like having those come, and like it just had such a great built-in tension, and I think that's just something this book like absolutely hit out of the park. So if you are wanting to write dark fantasy or horror and you are really struggling with mood and atmosphere, I think The Year of the Witching is an awesome book to learn that from. Next up is The Silence of Bones by June Her, who I do know, and we are friends, but that's not why she's in this book is in this top reads list. I honestly like adored this book. I'm so excited for The Forest of Lost Girls. If that is not the right title, I will fix it. But the book that she has coming out in 2021, I'm so excited for it. And it's just The Silence of Bones, very similar to The Year of the Witching, not in content, but like just a lesson in mood and atmosphere. But I'm going to tell you what it's about. So it's about Saul, and she's an indentured servant to the police headquarters. So it's set in a past dynasty in Korea. The name is escaping me, but it's set in past, it's historical, and at that time the police investigators, they had kind of indentured servants that were women, because the men weren't allowed to touch the women's bodies even if they were dead. So then they have the women that they have, and they can touch the bodies and that sort of thing. And Saul, it gets wrapped up in this mystery and this investigation and like trying to find out who the murderer is. I am a horrible synopsis person, but honestly this book blew me away in terms of really atmosphere, but also in just beautiful writing. Yeah, I don't know if it can like teach you beautiful writing, but definitely atmosphere I think was done really, really well. And for me, I always find that I have issues with historicals. I find myself less interested, but this one just tugs you in. It is a really good lesson in setting, of how to set up a world that is a real world and really draw people into it and explain what's happening, but without making it feel like exposition. I was like, exposition where? It felt like there was no exposition issue of like having info dumps or anything like that. Everything was just weaved in so perfectly. And I think if you are trying to build a world, especially a historical world that is based on fact, or like even if you're doing like an urban or contemporary fantasy in which there is a real world setting that you are weaving into this, I think this book does such an amazing job of that and is really a fantastic lesson in that, as well as atmosphere. There was just this like, it was the mystery atmosphere. In my head, it feels like a gentle fog, like, and like a blue feeling. This is ridiculous. I know this is ridiculous, but that's just the way the atmosphere felt. It really had that perfect mystery vibe, and it just brought you along. And I would say this book as well, like same as Legendborn, like lesson in a page turner. It's not like, definitely not as long as Legendborn, but like the mystery was propelling me forward. The twists all got me. One twist I thought I knew and I did not know, right? I was not correct. I also cried, so I guess if you want to read a book that makes people cry and figure out how that might help you in writing that sort of thing, I think The Silence of Bones is just fantastic. Did such a great job with atmosphere and setting. And next is Clown in a Cornfield by Adam Caesar, who actually also has a YouTube channel, which I'll link below if you want to check out his YouTube channel. But Clown in a Cornfield, this book made me so happy. I just like got so much inspiration from it. I think it is fantastic for fans of horror, and if you are a horror writer, I think it's a really good book. What I found in writing horror is that it's been difficult to find any craft books on it, so I've really this year relied on reading a lot of horror books to help me with writing horror, and I've been reading a lot of them, and it's been a very mixed experience, because I think especially with books, the genre of horror is so much larger than it seems and so much different than, for example, like the movie genre of horror, because I find a lot of horror that I'm reading, especially like the fantasy horror, is a more kind of atmospheric horror. It's not necessarily like what I think of right off the bat, because I honestly hadn't read a lot of horror books. Like my horror fandom is like very firmly rooted in movies and TV shows. But what I loved about Clown in a Cornfield is that it did an awesome job at using tropes. So every kind of genre will have its own tropes that kind of show up in the series, like things like in fantasy, there's like the chosen one trope, or like the I don't know, like a bodyguard trope I think is a thing, and like there's all sorts of tropes. And I think in horror, like as a genre, it has its own, and this book, Clown in a Cornfield, did such an amazing job of bringing those together. I've forgotten to tell you what the book is about, and I'm just now remembering. It's about a girl, I can't remember her name right now. This is like why I'm not a booktuber, because my memory is bad. But anyway, she moves to a new town with her dad. Her mom has recently passed away. And so she's moved to this new town, and things are kind of weird here. The first day in school, she like gets in trouble right off the bat. Like the teacher is wild. And he's really mad at these students, and she finds out these group of students kind of have their own secrets, and like this thing that they were involved in, this accident where another kid died. Oh my god, I'm so bad at summarizing. Anyway, it's like a slasher book. It's about killer clowns. It's super cool. But it hit so many horror tropes in one book. I was just flabbergasted. Like the fangirl in me, the horror fangirl in me just died. And so I think this was such a good example of like how to incorporate a lot of tropes into a book. I think this is specifically really good if you want to write horror, especially if you want to write horror and you're like a horror movie fan. I think this is really great. This also had a prologue that was just like perfect. The prologues in horror and thrillers and suspense, those are the prologues that I'm down for and that I think are really great. And this one did a really awesome job of setting up the town, of setting up this tragedy that these kids are associated with. And also something else that it did a great job of, I think, was multiple POVs. So it was a sort of story where you got points of view from the main character, who was the focus of the story, but you also got sort of like points of view from different people as it was necessary. And I think this is a thing that like comes about in thrillers and that sort of thing, thrillers and horror, that can be really useful to do. I struggle with this because I'm never quite sure which character to do, and then it's difficult for me to jump into the head and the POV of a character that I'm only going to do their POV once for the entire book, but I thought this book did an awesome job at jumping between them. So yeah, if you're looking for a book to read to help you with writing horror, I think this one is really, really, really good. Now I'm going to talk about Groan by Tiffany D. Jackson. I will remember to summarize in the beginning. And so this is about Enchanted, who is an aspiring singer, and she gets kind of scouted by a famous producer, Cornfield, at a singing competition, and basically becomes involved with him in this, I won't call it a relationship from her end, but it is essentially him grooming her, and things just kind of spiral out of control from there. There are so many amazing topics explored in here, you know, the ways, I think the main one being the ways in which men groom young women, but also how young women, especially young Black women, are treated in the media. There are parallels between this and the R. Kelly case, and this is not the R. Kelly case, and the author really explains that that's not what this is about. It's really about that story that repeats itself of these instances of grooming with young women and how they're villainized and that sort of thing. Amazing read. Definitely check out, be aware of trigger warnings before you go into it, just in case. But yeah, I think this is so amazing. I love Tiffany D. Jackson. I think she's an awesome author, and I think she is a must read if you want to write like thriller or mystery, because she comes with the twists. The twists, they always blow my mind. I never see them coming. I'm always blown away by them. It is just like so masterful the way she does it. And I think Tiffany's also really great in showing complex characters that have different sides to them that come out as you read more in the book. And so you're really discovering more and more about the character as you get through the whole book. Because sometimes I feel like in the beginning, in that setup first act, you can learn basically everything you need to know about the character, and then throughout the book you're just watching them and their evolution of their arc and how they change. But I find that in Tiffany's books, her characters, like your perspective of them changes so often, and I feel like that's such a great mirror, especially because she works with real life cases. It's such a great mirror of how the media interacts with people in those situations, and you yourself, as you're reading, your opinion is shifting and changing. And even if it's not like shifting that much, like I found in this book particularly, like my opinion of Enchanted didn't shift that much, but you also got to see this lens of how different characters are viewing her, and you can see how she as a character is shifting in the minds of the other characters. And so I think, so for two things, for the twists, for sure, you can learn a lot. But I think Tiffany does such strong character arcs, and especially how other characters are interacting with that character. Because I think it's so easy, especially in YA, to fall into the trap in which like other characters kind of become props for the main character's growth, and they don't seem to have their own growth or arcs themselves. And I don't think you need to write a character arc for every single character in your book, but I think that the way the characters are interacting needs to shift and change as that character shifts and changes to make sense. And I think especially with the parents in this book, like they were just done so fantastically. So great for character arcs and great for those twists, and also for how to incorporate discussions of real life things like being a Black girl and the entertainment industry and all that things, and like incorporating those discussions into a fiction book that is still extremely entertaining even though it's tackling difficult subjects. And the last book is My Dark Vanessa by Kate Elizabeth Russell. This, I will say, I feel very firmly is my favorite read of 2020. I absolutely adored this book. Obviously watch out for trigger warnings. This is about like Groan. It is about a grooming situation. It is about a teacher-student relationship, and it's an adult, so it bounces between like her as a teenager and her as an adult. And it does talk about like the Me Too movement and that sort of thing. Yes, and essentially it is about this girl. I cannot remember her name. Oh my gosh, for the life of me. My memory is truly bad. But it's about a girl, and she goes to this boarding school, and she's kind of at odds with fitting in and ends up in this relationship with this teacher. Relationship quote marks, because it is a grooming situation. It is clear that that's what it is. But I just thought this book was absolutely amazing. And I think the big thing that stood out to me was this great balance in which I think like I have the impression that the author is taking a stance that how this teacher has groomed this student is bad and wrong. And we know that, but it's really presented it in a way that doesn't feel preaching and that doesn't feel like someone trying to do an after school special for you. It's extremely authentic. I really felt that it was really like, yeah, it just felt really authentic. And I think it did a really good job of getting into the mindset of those characters, and the voice is just impeccable. And I think, so I'm recommending this one with the writing perspective because I know that voice is hard. Voice and finding your writing voice and getting a writing voice right is super difficult because nobody has any instructions for you for how to make voice better. And it is very hard to teach people how to make voice better and like what people mean when they say voice. And so, oh my gosh, my dog is snoring. But I recommend My Dark Vanessa because I think she's done such a great job with character voice and like diving into the character's head. I think that was done really strongly. And I think also this flip back and forth between the past and the present was done really well in a way that just felt so seamless. Like I felt that the character in the present, I could exactly feel the character in the past. And by that, I mean, they didn't feel like two different characters, which I think can sometimes happen when you have two different timelines of the same character. They can feel like completely separate characters. And sometimes that works for plot reasons. I won't say the book that I think it works really well in because it's spoilers, but sometimes that really works. But I think in case of a lot of books, you want it to feel like the same character. It's just that they've changed. And I think this book did such an awesome job in that. I absolutely adored this book. I loved it so much. I loved it. And so, yeah, I think it's just a really good lesson in voice. And I think especially if you are wanting to write a book where you are going to discuss more serious topics, I think it's a really good read for that as well, to kind of see how that's done with like addressing the topic, but also with like nuance, so that it doesn't feel after school special. And I think Groan is really good for that as well. So yeah, So that's it for my top reads of 2020 from a writing perspective. I hope this was helpful for you. I know sometimes I'm a little bit like not as coherent as I would like to be, especially when I'm just talking about books that I loved. I'm so tempted to just hold up the book and be like, I love this. This was good for writing. But I hope this really helped you out. I hope that you'll check out those books. I thought they were great, but I know different strokes for different folks. So I don't expect everyone to love books that I think are amazing and did a really good job, but I really just wanted to point out the writing craft things that I really took away from those books and that I really learned to help incorporate in my own writing. These are books that inspired me as well. Like certainly Legendborn inspired me to want to write a dark academia book. Clown in a Cornfield inspired me with this second horror book and like wanting to incorporate more movie tropes. And so I think that just as a writer, like all these books that you read, reading often, reading widely can have such a huge impact on your writing craft. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed to me already, please subscribe. And what were some top reads or just one top read from 2020 that you loved? And what did it teach you about writing craft? What did you learn about writing from it? Please comment below and then we'll have even more recommendations for us all to check out. And thank you so much for watching. Bye!